A lot of what we do on the ranch or in farming is a lot of picking up of heavy and also odd objects. And a lot of times we tend to carry them on our shoulders because it's easier, right? So anytime we're moving something from the ground up or above our like waistline, the biggest thing that we need to think about is keeping a nice tight core and a relatively flat back. You'll hear the term neutral spine is what we're really looking for. So we don't want to go from this rounded position to this like hyperextended position really hard, just because that will throw out our backs, which is what we normally see people do, is from like super rounded. So when you go to pick up, say, this grain of or this bag of grain, or maybe a tire or something else that's kind of odd, we want to make sure that we're setting up in a position that we feel like our core is nice and strong. We're getting that bag in a position we know that once we start lifting it, I'm not going to have to do any weird things with the rest of my body to get it to my shoulder. And the other big important piece is that we use our hips, because that's just giving our arms an opportunity to be strapped. So they're just the guiding factor to get the weight to our shoulder. So from here, big hip pop, and you just move it up to your shoulder. So that trunk position, once it's weighted, isn't vulnerable holding something up there. Keeping, really, in all the things we do on the ranch, it comes back to keeping a nice tight midsection. So something we do a lot in any kind of ag setting for the most part is farmer carries of all different types, whether that be with buckets or maybe hay bales. That would be terrible, but you could do various different types of farmer's carries. Typical one with buckets, whether that be water or grain. Difference with those two is that if you're carrying water, you're going to have the effect of water sloshing around, which will be even more important when I talk about the core part. Biggest thing is kind of like anything I talked about, moving from the ground to our shoulders. We want a nice strong setup, so that same nice flat back or a nice neutral spine, and making sure that when we go to pick up whatever it is, that we're going to have a nice braced position when we start to move, and so that when we go to walk, we're still keeping that nice tight core and we're not letting the buckets pull us around and possibly pulling our back out or something from rotating. Another good point to think about with any kind of movement like this is that we want to keep our arms nice and locked out and a solid grip on whatever we're carrying, and not like this. We don't want any bicep tears or bicep tendons blown out here. Just nice, strong, stacked position, and keep everything tight as we're moving. And then when we go to set them down, same thing. We want that nice controlled set down to the ground, not just flopping and blowing our backs out that way. Okay, so a lot of what we talk about on the ranch, like I mentioned earlier, is that there's a lot of odd object things that we do. And the saddle is a perfect example of an odd object where it's relatively heavy. It's 50 pounds. It's big enough and oddly shaped enough that you have to get a little bit of momentum to throw it on your horse, depending how big it is. But this is one, again, where we want to talk about keeping our core nice and tight when we're throwing on a saddle, and not just willy-nilly twisting and not thinking about keeping everything nice and tight so that we don't blow out our backs. And also, we have to use our arms a little bit. So a lot of what we talk about in CrossFit is always using the power from our hips, so that you don't have to muscle everything as hard. So when I go to throw this on this horse, what I'm really going to think about is just a little bit of a hip pop to get that saddle up there so that it makes it easy. And then you'll rock it around here. And then from there, you're just putting on the saddle.